In just 14 minutes, a billionaire financial empire began to disappear before the millionaire's eyes. Even the best specialists couldn't contain the threat until an 8-year-old girl with a child's laptop offered her help. She deciphered the attack and saved the millionaire. If this beautiful story of overcoming adversity and love has interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Now, on with the story. The morning arrived in New York City like any other, with the sun fighting to break through the grey haze that hovered over the skyscrapers of Park Avenue. It was an ordinary day in March, with traffic already congested since 6 in the morning and the buzz of people rushing to their appointments. But for Richard Thompson, that Thursday would be anything but ordinary. At 52, Richard had built an empire that began with a small tech company in a garage in the Williamsburg neighborhood. 3 decades later, Thompson Holdings controlled investments in dozens of countries, moved billions of dollars, and was considered one of the most solid companies in North America. All this thanks to the tireless work of a man who never took a vacation, who slept 4 hours a night, and who turned every obstacle into an opportunity. That morning, Richard arrived at the office on the 32nd floor of the mirrored building at 7:15, as he always did. He greeted Sandra, his secretary of 15 years, accepted the coffee she already had ready, and headed to the conference room where his digital security team awaited him for the monthly report presentation. There were 8 men and 3 women, all experts recruited from the best universities in the world. Each of them received 6-figure salaries to ensure the company's systems were impenetrable, and until that moment, they had done an impeccable job. Michael Fisher, the director of cybersecurity, was a 40-year-old man with a PhD from MIT and experience in government agencies. He began the presentation with charts and statistics showing the health of the systems, the penetration tests conducted, and the updates implemented. Richard listened attentively, but his mind was already on the next meeting, with Japanese investors interested in expanding partnerships in the field of artificial intelligence. He looked out the panoramic window, observing the city he loved when Michael's phone rang. The security director's face changed in seconds. From confident and calm, it became pale and tense. He excused himself, answered, and after a few seconds his eyes widened. "Richard, the offshore accounts," Michael began, his voice trembling. "We're detecting unauthorized movements." The businessman felt a chill run down his spine. The offshore accounts were the core of the company's asset protection, financial structures built over years with specialized lawyers, layers of security, and military-grade encryption. "Explain," Richard said, rising from his chair. The entire team was already on their laptops, typing frantically, opening screens of code and monitoring systems. "Someone is transferring funds," said Julia, one of the youngest analysts on the team, only 26, but already internationally recognized for her expertise in blockchain. "The amounts are being moved to accounts we don't recognize." Richard rushed to the main screen in the conference room, where the numbers danced in real time. Millions of dollars disappearing every second. His breathing grew heavy. Decades of work, of sacrifice, of sleepless nights, all being drained before his eyes. "Stop it," he ordered, trying to keep his voice steady. Michael and the team were already trying. They activated emergency protocols, tried to interrupt the transactions, blocked access, but nothing worked. It was as if they were fighting a ghost. Every attempt to block was bypassed in seconds, every firewall disabled, every layer of security undone as if it were paper. "This isn't possible," Julia murmured, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "The encryption we use is military grade. No one can break it this fast." But someone was. Richard felt the weight of reality fall on his shoulders. He had never been a religious man, but at that moment he wished he could believe in something greater, in some miracle that could save everything he had fought for. He thought of his wife, Marina, who was at home preparing his birthday dinner, unaware that the gift she had planned with such care might be given to a bankrupt man. He thought of his employees, of the thousands of families who depended on Thompson Holdings to live. He thought of the social projects he financed, the scholarships, the hospitals he helped maintain, everything crumbling. "How much time do we have?" he asked, his voice coming out weaker than he intended. Michael looked at the screen, did some quick calculations and answered with regret. At the current rate, 14 minutes. After that, the funds will be fragmented into so many different accounts it will be impossible to track or recover. 14 minutes. Less than a quarter of an hour to lose a lifetime. The room fell silent, broken only by the frantic sound of keystrokes and system notifications. Richard leaned his hands on the table, feeling his legs weaken. He was not a man to give up, but for the first time in decades he didn't know what to do. That's when the conference room door opened. Everyone turned at once, annoyed by the interruption. It was Celia, the supervisor of the cleaning crew, a 60-year-old woman who had worked at the company for almost 10 years. Beside her, a small girl with braids in her hair, wearing a pink t-shirt with a kitten print and holding an old laptop covered in colorful stickers. "Celia, this is not the time," Sandra said, trying to be gentle but firm. "I know, miss, but Isabella here said she can help," the woman replied, her voice filled with hope and nervousness. Richard looked at the girl. She couldn't be more than 8 years old. Her brown eyes were large and expressive, and she held the laptop as if it were a protective shield. "With all due respect, Celia," Michael said, with a mix of condescension and irritation, "we're dealing with a sophisticated cyber attack. This is no time for games." Isabella took a step forward. "It's not a game," she said, her voice thin but determined. "I know what's happening. It's a dual-vector attack with asymmetric encryption. They're using a combination of a modified Diffie-Hellman algorithm with a digital steganography-based obfuscation layer." The room fell into absolute silence. Michael blinked, incredulous. "How do you know that?" "Because I study these things," the girl replied, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "And I can help, if you let me." Richard looked at the screen. 12 minutes and 40 seconds. He had nothing to lose. "Let her try," he ordered. The team exchanged disbelieving glances, but obeyed. Michael, reluctantly, motioned for Isabella to approach. The girl placed her old laptop on the table, connected a few cables with the agility of someone who did this every day, and began to type. Her fingers were small, but they moved with surgical precision across the keyboard. Lines of code appeared on the laptop screen as she muttered commands under her breath. The security team watched, still skeptical, but beginning to realize that this child was not just playing. "They're using a backdoor in the third-level authentication protocol," Isabella explained, without taking her eyes off the screen. "You didn't even know it." "Existed because it was injected during a routine update 3 months ago. Look here." She turned the laptop so everyone could see. On the screen, lines of code showed exactly what she was describing. Julia moved closer, analyzed it quickly, and her eyes widened. "She's right," she whispered. "How did we not see this before?" "Because it was designed to be invisible," Isabella replied. "But if you look at the latency pattern between the requests, you can see the signature. Look at the spikes here, here, and here." Michael leaned over the screen and Richard saw his face change from skepticism to astonishment. 10 minutes, someone announced. Isabella started typing again, now even faster. "I'm going to create a false mirror," she explained. "They'll think they're still draining the accounts, but they'll actually be moving phantom funds. Meanwhile, I'll redirect the real amounts back." "Can you do that?" Richard asked, allowing himself a sliver of hope. "I can, but I'll need full administrative access." Michael hesitated, but Richard didn't. "Give her whatever she needs." In less than 2 minutes, Isabella had complete access to Thomson Holdings systems. The security team watched, fascinated and terrified at the same time, as this 8-year-old girl did what 11 experts had failed to do. She created virtual partitions, redirected data flows, built encrypted tunnels, and implemented countermeasures in real time. Every line of code was executed with precision, every command accurate. 7 minutes. "I'm tracing the origin of the attack," Isabella said, opening another window on her laptop. "They're using proxy servers in 17 different countries, but the digital signature has a pattern." "Let me see." Her eyes scanned the data with impressive speed. Richard watched this child, who should have been in school drawing or playing, commanding a cybersecurity counter-operation with the competence of a general on a battlefield. 5 minutes. "Found it!" Isabella exclaimed. The root server is in Tallinn, Estonia. They're using an abandoned data center. I'm going to hack into their system and reverse the flow." "You're going to hack the hackers?" Julia asked, incredulous. "It's the only way," the girl replied without taking her eyes off the screen. And then, with 3 minutes and 22 seconds on the clock, something extraordinary happened. The numbers that were once flowing out of Thomson Holdings' accounts stopped. For a second, nothing moved. And then, slowly, the values began to return. First in the millions, then in the hundreds of millions, until every single diverted cent was back where it should be. The room erupted in exclamations of relief and disbelief. Michael ran a hand through his hair, Julia let out a nervous laugh, and Richard felt his legs almost give way. But Isabella wasn't finished. "Now I'm going to patch the vulnerabilities," she said, continuing to type. "You had flaws in 7 different layers. I'm going to seal them all and implement a monitoring system that will alert you to any similar attempts in the future." In less than 2 minutes, she did exactly that. When she finally stopped typing and closed her laptop, the room was in absolute silence. Richard approached, knelt in front of the girl to be at her level, and asked with a choked voice, "Who are you?" Isabella smiled shyly. "I'm Isabella Sanchez. My dad, George, works in maintenance here in the building. I always come with my mom, Celia, when she does the morning shift." "And how did you learn to do all this?" Michael asked, still processing what he had just witnessed. "On my own," the girl replied, "with videos on the internet, books from the public library, and a lot of practice. I've liked computers since I was little." Julia let out an incredulous laugh. "Since you were little, but you're still little." Isabella shrugged, as if it were irrelevant. Richard felt a lump in his throat. "Why did you want to help? You don't even know me." The girl's face turned serious, and her large eyes seemed to carry a weight far greater than they should for someone her age. "Because I know what it's like to lose everything," she said softly. "My mom is very sick. She has a heart problem and she needs treatment, but we don't have the money. I study cybersecurity because I want to protect hospitals from attacks like this. I've seen news about hospitals being attacked and patients suffering. I don't want that to happen to my mum or to anyone." The silence that followed was deafening. Richard looked at Celia, who had tears streaming down her face. He looked at his team, who were watching the girl with a mixture of admiration and shame. 11 experts with degrees and high salaries, defeated by a child who taught herself with free videos. But more than that, Richard saw something he had forgotten over the years. He saw purity of intention. He saw talent uncorrupted by greed. He saw a spark of genius that sought no recognition or reward, but only wanted to do good. "Isabella," he said, his voice firm but emotional, "you've just saved not only my company, but thousands of jobs, projects, and dreams. I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to thank me," the girl replied. "I just wanted to help." Richard looked at Michael. "Call a meeting with legal and finance now." Then he turned to Celia. "You and your family will never have to worry about money again. Your treatment starts today at the best hospital in New York, and Isabella, you will have access to the best teachers, the best equipment, everything you need to develop your talent." The girl's eyes widened. "But I didn't do it for money." "I know," Richard replied with a sincere smile. "But the world needs people like you, and I'm going to make sure you have all the tools to change the world, if you want to." Celia burst into tears, hugging her daughter. The security team applauded, and even Michael, who was known for being cold and calculating, had shining eyes. As the commotion settled, with calls being made and plans being drawn, Richard stood, watching Isabella. The girl had gone back to her laptop, now showing Julia some details of the code she had written. At that moment, the businessman had a realization that would change everything. That attack had not been random. It had been too sophisticated, too coordinated. And if there was someone capable of hacking into Thomson Holdings systems, there were probably other targets. "Isabella," he called, approaching again, "you said the attack came from a server in Estonia, right?" "That's right." "Do you think it was an isolated attack?" The girl frowned, thoughtful. "No, I don't think so. From the code pattern and the infrastructure used, it looks like it was a test. They attacked you to see if it worked before doing something bigger. Something bigger like what? Asked Michael, who had come closer. Isabella opened her laptop again and began to show graphs and data. Look here. In the last 3 months, there's been a 300% increase in attempted breaches of financial systems around the world. Most were blocked, but some had partial success. They all use variations of the same code that attacked you today. Julia approached, analyzing the data. You tracked all this on your own? Yes, I have a system that monitors attack patterns. It's kind of a hobby of mine. Richard felt a chill. A hobby. This girl did in her spare time what entire government agencies struggled to accomplish. So you're saying, Richard began, that what happened today was just the beginning? Isabella nodded gravely. I think so. And I think the real attack will be much bigger and very soon. The girl's words hung in the air like a prophecy. Richard looked out the panoramic window, seeing New York City stretch as far as the eye could see. Millions of people living their lives, oblivious to the approaching danger. And at the center of it all, an 8-year-old girl who might be the only one capable of protecting them all. What do we do now? Michael asked. Richard took a deep breath. Now, he replied, we prepare. And we start to understand exactly what we're dealing with. He turned to Isabella, who was watching him with those large, serious eyes. Would you be willing to work with me? He asked. Not as an employee, but as a partner. I'll put all my company's resources at your disposal, and you help us protect not just Thompson Holdings, but as many institutions as we can. Isabella didn't answer immediately. She looked at her mother, who nodded with tears in her eyes. She looked at the laptop covered in stickers, which had been her companion on so many lonely nights of study. And then she looked back at Richard. I'm in, she said. But on one condition. Which is, everything we develop has to be shared. It's no use just protecting the rich. We have to protect everyone, hospitals, schools, everyone. Richard smiled. It was exactly the answer he had hoped for. Deal, he said, extending his hand. Isabella shook his hand with her small one, sealing a pact that would change not only their lives, but the fate of millions. As the team began to mobilize, discussing strategies and plans, Sandra appeared at the door with a worried expression. Mr. Thompson, she said, there are calls from Washington, D.C. and from London. Everyone is asking about the attack the news has spread. Richard sighed. The world already knew. And if Isabella was right about a bigger attack, then time was running out. Tell them the situation is under control, he instructed, and schedule a press conference for tomorrow. We're going to need to warn people about what's coming. Michael approached. With all due respect, Richard, are you sure about this? If we cause a panic, we could make things worse. And if we don't warn them and a catastrophe happens, Richard replied, how will we live with that? The question hung unanswered. Isabella continued to type, now with Julia by her side, the two working in perfect sync. The girl explained, complex concepts with a disarming simplicity, and Julia absorbed everything with the humility of someone who recognizes a genius when she sees one. Richard watched the scene and felt a mixture of emotions, pride for having had the courage to let Isabella try, fear of what was to come, hope that maybe, just maybe, they could make a difference, but above all, he felt gratitude. Gratitude that Celia had had the courage to open that door. Gratitude that Isabella had chosen to use her talent for good. Gratitude for being saved not by expensive technology or renowned experts, but by a girl who taught herself because she wanted to protect her mother. The following hours were a whirlwind. The legal team arrived and began preparing contracts and agreements. The finance department organized the resources for Celia's treatment and for the infrastructure Isabella would need. Experts were summoned from all over the country. But in the midst of all that organized chaos, Richard took a moment to be alone with Isabella. Can I ask you a question? He said. Sure. Aren't you scared of all this responsibility, of everything that could go wrong? Isabella stopped typing and looked at him. I'm very scared, she admitted. But my dad always says that courage isn't not being afraid. It's doing what needs to be done, even when you're scared. Richard smiled. Your father is a wise man. He's the best dad in the world. the girl replied with pride. "And my mum is the best mum. They always supported me, even when everyone said I was weird for liking computers instead of dolls." "You're not weird," Richard said. "You're extraordinary." Isabella blushed, turning her attention back to the laptop. Richard let her work, but not before asking one last question. "Why do you think this bigger attack will happen soon?" The girl became serious again. "Because the patterns show they're accelerating. Each test is faster than the last. And because," she hesitated, "I felt it." "Felt it?" "It's hard to explain. It's like when you play a video game for a long time and you start to predict the opponent's moves before they make them. I look at the data and I feel the intention behind it. And the intention here is bad, very bad." Richard nodded, trusting the instinct of this child more than he would trust any technical report. Outside, New York City continued its routine. People coming and going from work, children leaving school, street vendors hawking their wares. Everything normal, everything ordinary. But inside that room on the 32nd floor, a group of people knew the truth. They knew a storm was brewing, and they knew that an 8-year-old girl might be the only thing standing between civilization and chaos. The afternoon fell over the city, painting the sky in orange hues that contrasted with the grey of the buildings. Richard looked at the view he knew so well and wondered how many more ordinary mornings he would have, how many more days when he could simply look out the window without worrying about cyber attacks, breaches, or global catastrophes. Isabella stood up, putting away her laptop. "I have to go," she said. "My mom has an appointment at the clinic." Richard placed a hand on her shoulder. "Starting tomorrow, your mum won't be going to clinics anymore. She'll be going to Mount Sinai Hospital with the best doctors in the country." The girl's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you," Richard replied. "For saving us. For having the courage to walk through that door. For being who you are." Celia appeared to pick up her daughter, and Richard watched them leave, the mother with her arm around her daughter's shoulders, walking through the hallways they once cleaned and now traversed as guests of honor. Michael approached. "This is crazy, you know that, right?" "Completely," Richard agreed. "But what's the alternative?" "None," the security director admitted. "Absolutely none." That night, Richard returned home later than planned. Marina was waiting for him with his birthday dinner ready, candles lit, and a smile that vanished when she saw his face. "What happened?" she asked, concerned. And Richard told her everything. About the attack, about Isabella, about what was to come. Marina listened in silence, holding his hand, and when he finished, she said only one thing. "Then we'll face it together." And at that moment, Richard knew that no matter what lay ahead, he wouldn't be alone. He had Marina by his side, he had a dedicated team, and he had Isabella, an extraordinary girl who was about to change the world. But what none of them knew yet was that the approaching storm would be bigger than anyone could imagine, and that the choices they would make in the coming weeks would not only define their destinies, but the future of millions around the world. Somewhere in Tallinn, Estonia, in an abandoned data center, screens flickered with complex code. Someone was observing the data from the failed attack on Thomson Holdings, analyzing every detail, every flaw, and smiling, because the real game was just beginning. The next 3 days were a whirlwind of change in the lives of Isabella Sanchez and everyone around her. What began as a simple act of help had transformed into something much bigger, something the girl was still trying to fully comprehend. The morning after the attack, Richard Thompson fulfilled every promise he had made. Celia was taken to Mount Sinai Hospital in a limousine that left her speechless. George Sanchez, Isabella's father, was called from his cleaning shift to a meeting where he discovered his wife would have access to the best cardiac treatment in the country, fully funded by Thomson Holdings. The man, a 45-year-old with hands calloused from decades of manual labor, wept in front of Richard. They were not tears of sadness, but of a relief so profound it seemed to spring from his soul. For years he had worked 3 different jobs to try to save money for his wife's treatment, watching her slowly waste away as hope slipped through his fingers like sand. Now sitting in that luxurious consultation room, with doctors explaining procedures and treatments with words he barely understood, George finally allowed himself to believe that Celia would have a chance. Meanwhile, Isabella was taken to a special room in the Thompson Holdings building, a space that Richard had ordered to be transformed into a state-of-the-art technology lab. High-performance computers, multiple monitors, equipment the girl had only seen in internet videos, all at her disposal. Michael Fisher and his team worked alongside Isabella, and with each passing hour, their respect for the girl grew. She not only understood advanced cybersecurity concepts, but often presented solutions they had never considered. It's like she sees the code differently. Julia, the 26-year-old analyst who quickly became Isabella's closest confidant on the team, commented to Michael during a break. It's not just logic, it's almost intuitive. A natural talent, Michael replied, still processing the fact that an 8-year-old was teaching a team of experts. But it wasn't all celebrations and discoveries. The press conference Richard had scheduled was set for that afternoon, and the decision to publicly warn about the threat of a massive cyber attack was causing internal divisions. In the executive boardroom, the company's top directors debated heatedly. "This will cause unnecessary panic," argued Frank Logan, the chief financial officer, a 50-year-old man known for his conservative approach. "If we're not sure the attack will happen, why alarm the market? Because if it happens and we don't warn people, the consequences will be far worse," Richard countered, his voice firm. "Isabella analyzed the patterns. She's certain something big is being planned." "With all due respect, Richard," intervened Claudia. Morris, the chief legal officer, a smart and pragmatic woman of 42, "We're basing a massive corporate decision on the intuition of a child. How is that going to sound to the shareholders, to the market?" Richard slammed his hand on the table, silencing everyone. That child saved billions of dollars in a matter of minutes. That child saw patterns our entire security team missed. So yes, I'm going to trust her intuition more than I would trust any fancy technical report that failed to predict yesterday's attack. The ensuing silence was heavy. Michael, who was present at the meeting, cleared his throat. "May I say something?" "Please," Richard said. "I've spent the last 48 hours working with Isabella, and I can say without a shadow of a doubt that she is no ordinary child. Her level of understanding of systems architecture, encryption, and attack patterns is superior to any professional I've ever met, and I've worked with the best from MIT, the NSA, and government agencies around the world." He paused, letting his words sink in. "If she says a bigger attack is coming, I believe her, and I think we should prepare for the worst while hoping for the best." Frank sighed. "And what if warning the public accelerates the attack? What if the perpetrators realize we're on alert and move up their plans?" "It's a risk," Richard admitted. "But I'd rather people be prepared and alert than vulnerable and caught off guard." The vote was close, but Richard's decision was final. The press conference would happen. At 3 in the afternoon, the Thompson Holdings press room was packed. Journalists from major national outlets and international correspondents squeezed between cameras and microphones. Speculation had been rampant since news of the attack had leaked, and everyone wanted answers. Richard stepped up to the podium with Marina by his side, a gesture of support and unity. He had asked that Isabella not be present, to protect her identity and preserve her childhood as much as possible. "Good afternoon," he began, his firm voice echoing through the room. "Thank you all for coming. I'll be direct because the situation demands transparency. 2 days ago, Thompson Holdings suffered a sophisticated cyber attack that attempted to drain billions of dollars from our accounts. The attack was neutralized and no funds were permanently lost." Murmurs erupted throughout the room. Reporters shouted questions, but Richard raised his hand for silence. "More important than the attack itself is what we discovered by analyzing its patterns. There is concrete evidence that this was just a test, part of a much larger operation planned against financial, healthcare, and governmental institutions around the world." The murmuring turned into an uproar. "Therefore," Richard continued, raising his voice, "we are here to issue a public warning. Companies, hospitals, banks, government agencies, everyone needs to review their cybersecurity defenses immediately. We are sharing the information we've gathered for free, and offering technical support to any institution that needs it. A reporter from CNN raised her hand. "Mr. Thompson, do you have any idea when this larger attack might happen?" "We don't have an exact date," he replied, "but we believe it will be soon, hence the urgency." Another journalist from the Wall Street Journal asked, "How did you manage to neutralize the attack? We have information that your security team was completely overwhelmed." Richard hesitated. This was the delicate part. "We received assistance from an external consultant with exceptional expertise in cybersecurity. For security reasons, I cannot reveal her identity at this time." "So it was a woman?" asked a young reporter from the New York Times. Richard smiled faintly. "It was a brilliant person, that's all I can say." The press conference lasted over an hour, with Richard answering questions about security, protocols, and preventive measures. When it finally ended, he was exhausted but relieved. The message had been delivered. Now it was up to the world to decide whether to take the warning seriously. While Richard dealt with the press, Isabella was in the lab with Julia, working on something that had occupied her since the previous night. "What exactly are you building?" Julia asked, watching lines of code scroll across the screen at a dizzying speed. "I'm creating a global monitoring system," Isabella replied, without taking her eyes off the monitors, "something that can detect attack patterns in real time across thousands of different networks simultaneously." "That's technically possible," Julia questioned, "but it sounds like it would require an absurd amount of processing power." "That's why I'm using distributed processing," the girl explained. "Each connected system contributes a small part of its processing power. Individually, it's not much, but collectively, it's enough." Julia blinked. "You just described a decentralized neural network." "Exactly," Isabella confirmed with a smile. "I learned about it in an article I read on collaborative artificial intelligence." "You're 8 years old," Julia whispered, more to herself than to Isabella. "I'll be 9 in June," the girl replied cheerfully, as if that made any difference. The hours passed quickly. Isabella worked with impressive concentration, pausing only when Julia insisted she eat something or rest. The analyst had taken on an almost motherly role with the girl, ensuring she didn't exhaust herself. When the clock struck 7 in the evening, the lab door opened and George entered, still in his work uniform. "Isa, my girl, time to go," he said, in a soft voice. The girl looked up at her father and smiled. "Hi, Dad, how was your day?" "Different," George replied with a tired smile. "Very different." Isabella saved her work, said goodbye to Julia with a hug, and left hand in hand with her father. Julia watched the two of them walk down the hall, the simple man in a blue uniform and the little girl with worn-out sneakers and a school backpack, and felt a pang in her chest. Michael appeared beside her. "Touching, isn't it?" "Very," Julia agreed. "She's special, Michael. Truly special." "I know," he said. "That's why we have to protect her." "Protect her from what?" Michael pointed to the monitors where graphs showed hacking attempts happening in real time around the world. "From all of this. There are dangerous people in this world, Julia, and if they find out what she's capable of, they'll want to use that talent for evil." "Then we'll make sure that doesn't happen," Julia said with determination. The next morning, the headlines of every newspaper were about Richard Thompson's warning. Reactions ranged from skepticism to panic. Some experts praised the transparency, while others accused Thompson Holdings of creating hysteria to promote its own security services. But serious companies took the warning to heart. In Washington, D.C., the Department of the Treasury called an emergency meeting. In New York, the Federal Reserve increased its security protocols. In London, banks implemented extra protective measures. And somewhere in the world, people with dark intentions watched all of this and adjusted their plans. Richard was in his office reviewing reports when Sandra entered with a worried expression. "Mr. Thompson, there's a visitor who insists on speaking with you. He says it's urgent." "Who is it?" He introduced himself as Albert Drummond from the Department of Defense. Richard frowned. "Send him in." The man who entered was tall, around 50, with slicked-back gray hair and an impeccable gray suit. He had the bearing of someone accustomed to giving orders and being obeyed. "Mr. Thompson," he said, extending his hand. "Colonel Albert Drummond, Defense Intelligence." Richard shook his hand cautiously. "How can I help you, Colonel?" Drummond sat down, uninvited. "I came to talk about your press conference yesterday, about the consultant who neutralized the attack." "Yes?" "I need to know who she is." "No," Richard replied simply. The colonel leaned forward. "Mr. Thompson, we're talking about national security. If there's someone with the ability to neutralize attacks of this magnitude, the government needs access to that asset." "That asset," Richard said with an icy tone, "is a person, and she's not for sale." "I'm not talking about buying," Drummond retorted. "I'm talking about protecting. If information leaks about who neutralized the attack, that person will become a target." "That's precisely why her identity is protected," Richard said. "For how long?" the colonel questioned. "Information always leaks, Mr. Thompson. Always. And when it does, do you want that person to be alone or under the protection of the U.S. government?" Richard studied the man before him. There was truth in his words, but there was also danger. Handing Isabella over to the government machine would expose her to a world of bureaucracy, politics, and potential exploitation that he couldn't control. "I'll consider your offer," Richard said finally, "but for now the answer is no." Drummond stood up, leaving a card on the desk. "When you change your mind, and you will, call me. The number is there." After the colonel left, Richard stared at the card. Marina, who had witnessed the conversation from a chair in the corner of the room, approached. "He's right about one thing," she said softly. "Isabella is going to need protection." "I know," Richard replied, "but not from them. Not yet." "Then from whom?" Richard thought for a moment. "From us. We'll create our own security structure for her and her family." While Richard dealt with the political fallout of his decisions, Isabella continued working on the monitoring system. In 3 days, she had created something that would normally take an entire team months to develop. The system was elegant in its simplicity. It discreetly connected to networks around the world, analyzed traffic, patterns, identified anomalies, and alerted about potential threats. All in real time, all automated, all without violating individual privacy. Michael reviewed the code line by line and couldn't find a single flaw. "This is impressive, Isabella, truly impressive." "Thanks," the girl said, but her face was serious. "Something's wrong." "What?" "The patterns have changed. Look here." She showed graphs on the screen. The hacking attempts that had been occurring steadily for the past few months had dropped drastically in the last 24 hours. "Isn't that good?" Michael asked. "Fewer attacks means it's safer, right?" "No," Isabella replied, shaking her head. "When you're about to do something big, you stop doing small things beforehand. It's like when you hold your breath before you dive." Michael felt a chill run down his spine. "You think they're preparing for the attack?" "I think they're already in position," Isabella said, "and they're just waiting for the right moment. We need to tell Richard." Minutes later, Richard, Michael, Julia, and Isabella were gathered in the lab, looking at the data. "How much time do we have?" Richard asked. Isabella bit her lower lip, concentrating. "Hard to say, but if I had to guess, I'd say less than a week, maybe less." "What can we do?" Isabella took a deep breath. "I've finished the monitoring system. It's ready to be deployed, but for it to work completely, we need companies and institutions to install a small program on their networks." "And how do we convince them to do that?" Julia asked. "By showing them it works," Isabella replied. "If we can demonstrate it at a few large companies, others will follow." Richard was already on the phone. "I'll call the CEOs I know. Michael, prepare a technical presentation. Julia, you help Isabella prepare the demo. We have a lot of work and very little time." The next 48 hours were frantic. Richard used all his contacts to schedule demonstrations. Major banks, leading hospitals, tech companies, all received invitations to see Isabella's system in action. The first demonstration was at Bank of America's headquarters in Charlotte. Richard, Michael, and Isabella flew to the city in a private jet. During the flight, Isabella stared out the window with wide eyes, fascinated by the view of the clouds. "Is this your first time on a plane?" Richard asked. The girl nodded. "It's amazing. It feels like we're floating." Richard smiled. "You'll be traveling a lot from now on, Isabella, to places you can't even imagine. Can I bring my mum and dad with me?" "Whenever you want." At the Bank of America headquarters, they were greeted by the institution's president, a serious man named Anthony Carter, and a team of 10 security experts. When Isabella entered the conference room, there were murmurs. The experts looked at Richard, expecting an explanation. "Gentlemen," Richard began, "this is Isabella Sanchez, the creator of the system you're about to see." "A child?" one of the experts questioned, incredulous. "Is this some kind of joke?" Michael stepped forward. "I suggest you reserve your judgment until you've seen what she can do." Isabella, completely calm despite the skeptical looks, connected her laptop to the presentation system. Within minutes, she had access to the bank's internal network, with permission, of course, and began the demonstration. "Your system," she began in a clear, firm voice, "has 3 critical vulnerabilities that I've identified in the last 10 minutes. The experts' faces shifted from skepticism to alarm. "The first," Isabella continued, showing it on the screen, "is in the authentication layer for international transfers. There's a backdoor here that can be exploited using a modified SQL injection." "Impossible," one of the experts said. "We've tested that hundreds of times." Isabella typed a few commands, and suddenly the screen showed that she had accessed restricted areas of the system. "It's not impossible. It's just hard to find because it's hidden in a legacy protocol that no one uses anymore." The silence in the room was absolute. Over the next hour, Isabella not only demonstrated the vulnerabilities, but also showed how her system could detect and protect against them in real time. She showed how the program adapted to new types of attacks, how it learned from each breach attempt, and how it communicated with other connected systems to create a collaborative defense network. When she finished, Anthony Carter was impressed. "How much do you want for this system?" Richard smiled. "Nothing. We're offering it for free." "For free?" Carter repeated, incredulous. "Why?" "Because if a global attack happens," Richard explained, "it's not enough for just a few institutions to be protected. We need a collective defense, and that only works if everyone has access. But you could make billions from this." "We already have billions," Richard replied. "What we want now is to use that resource to make a difference." Isabella looked at Richard with admiration. He was keeping his promise to share everything they developed. Anthony shook Richard's hand, then Michael's, and finally knelt to be at Isabella's level. "Young lady, you are extraordinary. Thank you for sharing your talent with us." Isabella smiled shyly. "You're welcome. I just want to help." In the following weeks, the demonstration was repeated at dozens of institutions. Banks, hospitals, energy companies, transportation networks, all installed Isabella's system. The defense network grew every day, connecting thousands of institutions in an invisible protective web. But while the good guys were organizing, evil was not idle. In a discreet apartment in the East Village, a 35-year-old woman named Veronica Lynch was watching the news about Isabella's defense system with particular interest. Veronica was beautiful, with dark hair and penetrating eyes that hid a sharp intelligence and a non-existent morality. She worked as a digital security consultant, but her real business was much shadier. She sold information, created backdoors in corporate systems, and occasionally organized cyber attacks for hire. And now, she had found her new target. "Who is this girl?" she asked the man sitting on the couch, a Russian hacker known only as Dmitri. "Nobody knows," he replied in a thick accent. "Her identity is protected, but from her work, I'd say she's under 20, maybe even a teenager." Veronica smiled. "A prodigy. Interesting. What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking," Veronica said slowly, "that if we can identify her, we can use her, or at least use what she creates." Dmitri shook his head. "Dangerous. Thomson Holdings is protecting her too well." "Everything has a weakness," Veronica replied. "We just need to find it." And as she plotted her dark plans, Isabella continued to work, oblivious to the approaching danger. She was in her lab refining the system when Julia entered with an excited expression. "Isa, I have amazing news." "What?" "You've been invited to give a lecture at Columbia University, at the Department of Computer Science. They want you to talk about your system to the computer science students." Isabella's eyes widened. "Really? But I've never given a lecture." "It'll be great," Julia assured her, "and you'll inspire a lot of people." The lecture was scheduled for the following week. Isabella was nervous but also excited. It would be her first public appearance since everything had begun. Richard insisted on extra security measures. Michael coordinated a discreet team of security guards who would be scattered throughout the auditorium. Cameras were checked, access was controlled, every detail was planned. On the day of the lecture, the auditorium was packed. Students, professors, industry professionals, all curious to see the mysterious consultant who had saved billions and created a revolutionary cybersecurity defense system. When Isabella walked onto the stage, a shocked silence fell over the room. A child. The consultant was a child. Murmurs erupted, but Isabella, with a courage that surprised even herself, approached the microphone. "Hi," she began, her voice a little shaky. "My name is Isabella Sanchez. I'm 8 years old and I love computers." The sincerity in her voice disarmed any skepticism. For the next hour, Isabella spoke about how she taught herself, the challenges she faced and the system she created. She spoke with passion, with humility, and with a wisdom that seemed impossible for someone her age. When she finished, the auditorium erupted in applause. Students gave her a standing ovation. Professors wiped tears from their eyes. An 8-year-old girl had just given a masterclass in technology and life to some of the brightest minds in the country. But in the crowd, Veronica Lynch watched from a discreet corner, recording everything on her phone and smiling. Now she had a face, now she had a name, and now she could begin the hunt. Isabella Sanchez didn't know it yet, but her life was about to get much more complicated. The talent that had saved her had also put her in danger, and the choices she would make in the coming weeks would not only define her destiny, but could change the course of history. The week following the lecture at Columbia University brought significant changes to Isabella Sanchez's routine. What had once been a simple life, divided between the local public school and cleaning shifts with her mother, had transformed into a complex schedule that included meetings, demonstrations, and a job that impacted millions of people. But despite all the external transformation, Isabella was still an 8-year-old girl. She still loved cartoons, still played with her pet dog, a mutt named Popcorn that her father had rescued from the streets, and still struggled with math at school, an irony that made her laugh. On Monday morning, Celia was in the kitchen of the family's small apartment, preparing breakfast. The treatment at Mount Sinai Hospital was working. Her tests showed significant improvement, and for the first time in years, she could climb the stairs without getting out of breath. George entered the kitchen already dressed for work, but now his uniform was different. Richard had insisted on promoting him to facilities supervisor at Thompson Holdings, with a salary 5 times what he used to make. The man was still getting used to the idea of not having to work 3 jobs anymore. "Good morning, my love," he said, kissing his wife on the forehead. "How are you feeling?" "Good," Celia replied with a smile. "Better than I have in years. Sometimes I still can't believe this is all real." "It's real, all right," George said, holding her hand. "And it's all thanks to our little girl." Isabella appeared in the kitchen, still in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes. "Good morning, family." "Good morning, my little genius," her father said, hugging her. "Ready for another day of saving the world?" The girl laughed. "No world saving today, just regular school." But the normality Isabella craved was becoming increasingly distant. While she had breakfast with her parents, in another part of the city, Veronica Lynch was putting her plan into action. She had spent the week investigating everything about Isabella Sanchez. She found out where the family lived, which school the girl attended, their daily schedule, every detail of their routine, and the more she discovered, the more fascinated she became. "An 8-year-old girl," she murmured to Dmitri, who was sitting in front of a computer in her apartment. "A child who can do what entire teams can't." "What do you plan to do?" the Russian asked. For now, just observe, Veronica replied. We need to fully understand how she works, what motivates her, where her weaknesses are. And then, Veronica smiled, a cold smile that didn't reach her eyes. Then we make her an offer she can't refuse. Dmitri shook his head. She's a child, Veronica. A child with a family. That could get complicated. Everything has a price, Dmitri. Everyone has a price. We just need to find out what hers is. Meanwhile, in the lab at Thompson Holdings, Michael and Julia were analyzing the latest data from the monitoring system when something caught their attention. Julia, come look at this, Michael called, pointing to a series of graphs on the screen. The analyst approached, studying the patterns. What is it? Breach attempts. But look at the pattern. It's not random. It's like they're testing specific defenses. Julia tilted her head, concentrating. You think they're looking for something? Or someone, Michael replied grimly. He picked up the phone and called Richard. We need to talk, urgently. An hour later, Richard, Michael, Julia, and Isabella, who had arrived from school, were gathered in the businessman's office. Someone is looking for you, Isabella, Michael said bluntly. The breach patterns we've identified show attempts to access specific information about the consultant who neutralized the attack. Richard tensed. Do they know who she is? Not yet, Julia replied. But they're trying to find out. And they're good. Very good. Isabella, who had been quiet until then, spoke in a calm voice that contrasted with the tension in the room. I knew this would happen. Everyone looked at her. When you do something that gets attention, the girl explained, there's always going to be someone who wants to use it for evil. That's why I didn't want to appear at the lecture. But Julia said it would be inspiring. Julia felt a weight in her chest. Isa, I'm so sorry. I didn't think... It wasn't your fault, Isabella interrupted. I'm the one who agreed. And now we have to deal with the consequences. Richard was impressed by the girl's maturity. We'll increase security. Michael, I want 24-hour protection for Isabella and her family. I'm already on it, Michael said. And what about the monitoring system? Richard asked. Can these people bypass it? Isabella shook her head. Not with the current version, but if they find out who I am and try to force me to give them access, that's a different story. No one is going to force you to do anything, Richard said firmly. I promise. But promises, no matter how sincere, can't always be kept. In the following days, Isabella's life changed drastically. Discreet security guards followed her everywhere. At school, men in plain cars watched from a distance. At home, cameras were installed, alarms reinforced. George and Celia were worried, but tried not to show it in front of their daughter. At night, when Isabella was asleep, they would talk in low voices in the kitchen. Did we do the right thing? Celia questioned, tears in her eyes. Letting her get involved in all of this? She saved my life, honey, George replied, holding his wife's hand, and she's saving a lot of other people's lives. How could we stop that? But she's just a child. She should be worrying about homework and friends, not hackers and cyber attacks. George sighed. Our Isa has never been like other kids. Ever since she was tiny, she's always been different, smarter, more curious. Maybe this is her destiny. I don't want her to have a destiny, Celia said vehemently. I want her to have a childhood. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of George's cell phone ringing. It was Michael. Mr. Sanchez, we need to move you to a more secure location. Now. What? Why? We've identified suspicious movement near your apartment. It might be nothing, but we can't take any chances. In less than an hour, the Sanchez family was being moved to a safe house in a luxury condo building in Midtown. Isabella, still sleepy, carried popcorn in her arms as she was led to the armored car. Dad, what's happening? She asked, fear evident in her voice. Just a precaution, sweetie, George replied, trying to sound calm. Everything will be back to normal soon. But they both knew that normality was an illusion that was slipping further and further away. The safe house was luxurious, with 3 bedrooms, a large living room, and a stunning view of the city. But to the Sanchez family, it felt like a gilded cage. Isabella tried to maintain a routine. She continued to work remotely with Julia, refining the system, answering questions from institutions that had implemented the protection. But the shadow of the threat loomed over everything. It was during one of these remote work sessions that Isabella noticed something strange. "Look at this, Julia," she said, pointing to a sequence of code on the screen. Julia, who was connected via video call, leaned in to see better. "What is it?" "Someone tried to clone the system," Isabella explained. "Look at the signature here. It's an almost perfect copy, but there are small differences." "Is that possible?" Julia asked, alarmed. "Technically, yes," Isabella replied. "The code is open source, available to anyone. But this person didn't just copy it, they modified it. They removed the ethical barriers." "What does that mean?" "It means," Isabella said slowly, "that someone has created a version of my system without the safeguards that prevent malicious use." Julia turned pale. "We need to tell Richard and Michael. Now." Within minutes, an emergency meeting was underway. Richard, Michael, and 6 other experts from the security team discussed the implications of Isabella's discovery. "If this modified version falls into the wrong hands," Michael said, "it could be used not to protect systems, but to attack them. And worse," Isabella added over the video call, "since it was based on my code, it knows the vulnerabilities of the institutions that installed the original system." Richard ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "How do we stop this?" Isabella was silent for a moment, thinking. "There is a way," she said finally, "but it's risky." "Tell us," Richard ordered. "I can create a virus that specifically corrupts the modified versions of the system. It would identify the absence of the ethical guidelines and self-activate, rendering the code useless." Michael nodded. "Technically feasible, but what's the risk?" "The virus could be too aggressive," Isabella admitted. "If it's not calibrated perfectly, it could attack legitimate versions too, or it could spread beyond our control. So we're talking about potentially creating a virus that could cause massive damage," Richard summarized. "Yes," Isabella confirmed in a small voice, "but it's the only way to ensure the malicious version isn't used." Richard looked at Michael, who shook his head in doubt. Julia was visibly worried on the video screen. "Isabella," Richard said carefully, "are you sure you can control this virus?" The girl hesitated, and that hesitation was more telling than any answer could be. "I think so, but I can't guarantee it 100%. "Then we don't do it," Richard decided. "The risk is too great." "But if we don't," Isabella argued, "the risk could be even greater." The room fell silent, each person weighing the impossible options before them. It was Julia who broke the silence. "What if we develop the virus but don't release it yet? We have it ready, as a last resort, in case the situation gets worse." Richard considered the suggestion. "That's prudent. Isabella, can you do that?" "I can," the girl replied. "But I'll need help. The code has to be perfect." "You'll have the entire team at your disposal," Richard assured her. For the next 3 days, Isabella worked tirelessly on the virus. Julia went to the safe house every day, spending hours by the girl's side, reviewing code, running simulations, adjusting parameters. It was mentally grueling work, and Isabella began to show signs of exhaustion. Dark circles appeared under her eyes. She ate little and slept even less. Celia watched with a broken heart. "My daughter is working herself to death," she told George one night. "She's a child, for God's sake." George was also worried, but he understood something Celia struggled to accept. "She needs to do this, honey. Not because someone is forcing her, but because it's who she is. Our Isa has a sense of responsibility that many adults don't." "But at what cost?" Celia questioned, tears streaming down her face. It wasn't just Isabella's physical health that was a concern. The girl was beginning to carry an emotional weight that no one her age should have to bear. She understood that her decisions could affect millions of lives, and that understanding haunted her. One night, Julia found Isabella crying silently in her room, hugging popcorn. "Hey, what's wrong?" Julia asked, sitting beside her on the bed. "What if I mess up?" Isabella whispered. "What if the virus I create does more harm than good? What if people suffer because of me?" Julia hugged the girl, feeling her tremble. Isa, listen, you're not alone in this, okay? You have an entire team working with you. And if something goes wrong, it's not your fault. It's all of our responsibility. But I'm the one who created all of this, Isabella argued. I made the original system. If someone corrupted it, it's because I didn't protect it well enough. Julia gently pulled Isabella back to look into her eyes. You are 8 years old, 8. You've already done more for the world than most people do in a lifetime. You can't carry the weight of the world on your own. Isabella wiped her tears. Sometimes I just wish I were a normal girl. Go to school, play with friends, not have to think about codes and viruses and attacks. I know, Julia said softly, and I'm sorry you can't have that right now, but I promise we'll do everything we can to get you a normal life again. Soon. It was a promise Julia wasn't sure she could keep, but she had to say it anyway. While Isabella wrestled with her own inner demons, Veronica, Lynch was getting closer to her goal. She had managed to infiltrate one of her contacts as a contract employee at Thompson Holdings. The man, a maintenance technician named Carlos, had access to restricted areas and, more importantly, to the internal network systems. On a Thursday afternoon, Carlos managed to plant a small listening device in one of the conference rooms. The device was tiny, the size of a coin, and virtually undetectable. 2 hours later, it transmitted its first conversation. It was Michael talking to Richard about the latest developments on the virus Isabella was creating. Veronica listened to the recording 3 times, a smile growing on her face with each repetition. So the little genius is creating a virus, she murmured. Interesting. Dmitri, who was beside her, looked worried. Veronica, this is getting dangerous. We're talking about a child. If we get caught... We won't get caught, she interrupted. And as for the child, well, she's playing with fire. We're just enjoying the heat. What do you plan to do? Veronica leaned back in her chair, her eyes gleaming with possibilities. We'll let them finish the virus. We'll let them test it, perfect it. And then, when it's ready, we'll steal it. For what? To sell it, of course. Do you know how many governments, corporations, and organizations would pay for a virus capable of corrupting advanced security systems? Millions, maybe billions. Dmitri shook his head. This will have terrible consequences. Not our problem, Veronica replied coldly. Our problem is making money. The rest is just details. But not all dark plans stay hidden forever. The following Friday, the Thompson Holdings security team was conducting a routine sweep when they found the listening device in the conference room. Michael was livid when he received the news. How long has this device been here? He asked the technician in charge of the sweep. Hard to say for sure, the man replied, but based on the technology, I'd say it was planted less than a week ago. Michael immediately called an emergency meeting. Richard, he, and the head of corporate security, an experienced woman named Patricia Alves, reviewed all the security camera footage from the past week. It was Patricia who identified Carlos. There, she said, freezing the image. This technician. He entered the conference room on Tuesday, but there was no work order for that room on that day. Michael enlarged the image. Who is he? Carlos Ramirez. Works for a third-party company that's been providing services to us for 3 months. Bring him here, Richard ordered. Now. But when security went to look for Carlos, he had vanished. He wasn't on any of the building's floors, he wasn't answering his phone, and when they went to his registered address, they discovered it was fake. He was tipped off, Patricia said. Someone warned him that we found the device. Michael slammed his fist on the table, frustrated. We have a leak. Someone inside the company is working with them. The paranoia that set in was immediate and corrosive. If there was a traitor on the team, anyone could be a suspect. Meetings were now held in random locations, important communications were made only in person, and the trust that once existed began to crumble. And in the midst of all this, Isabella continued to work on the virus. Finally, after 12 days of intense work, she announced, "It's ready." The team gathered in the lab to see the demonstration. Isabella had created a virtual test environment where she simulated networks protected by the legitimate version of her system and, Networks using the corrupted version. When she activated the virus, the result was exactly what they had hoped for. The malicious code was identified and corrupted, rendering it useless. The legitimate versions remained untouched. Julia hugged Isabella. "You did it." But the girl didn't look relieved. "We haven't tested it in a real environment yet. This is controlled. Out there, the variables are infinite." Richard placed a hand on her shoulder. "We've done everything we could. The virus will be kept safe, ready to be used if necessary, but only as a last resort." Isabella nodded, but her eyes showed. She didn't share his optimism. And she was right to be worried, because that very night, while the Sanchez family slept in the safe house, Veronica Lynch was in her apartment, listening to the recording of the virus demonstration that Carlos had managed to capture before he fled. She had everything she needed: the virus's structure, its parameters, its capabilities. Now, it was just a matter of putting the pieces in place. "Dmitri," she called, "prepare the buyers. We're holding an auction." "An auction for what?" the Russian asked, though he already knew the answer. "For power," Veronica replied with a cruel smile. "Absolute power over the most advanced security systems in the world." And as she planned how to monetize the stolen work of an 8-year-old child, Isabella woke up in the middle of the night with a weight on her chest. She got out of bed quietly so as not to wake her parents and went to the window. She looked down at the city of New York below, millions of lights twinkling in the darkness, each one representing a life, a story, a dream. And for the first time since everything had begun, Isabella wondered if she had enough strength to protect all those lives. If an 8-year-old girl could really make a difference against forces so dark and powerful. Popcorn came to her, nuzzling his head against her leg. Isabella picked him up and whispered, "We're going to make it, right, Popcorn? We have to." The dog just licked her face, offering the only comfort he could. Outside, the city slept, oblivious to the battles being fought in the digital shadows, oblivious to the fact that a child was fighting to protect it, oblivious to the danger that was drawing ever closer, and in the darkness of the apartment, Isabella Sanchez, a girl who should have only been worried about homework and playtime, carried the weight of the world on her small shoulders and wondered if she would be strong enough not to let it fall. The auction took place on a dark web forum, known only to the most obscure circles of the internet. Veronica Lynch had prepared everything meticulously, creating layer upon layer of anonymity, using proxy servers in dozens of countries, making it impossible to trace the origin. The auction participants were a collection of people and organizations that operated in the shadows of the digital world. Hacker groups from Eastern Europe, intermediaries for questionable governments, unscrupulous corporations willing to pay fortunes for illegal advantages over their competitors. Dmitri watched nervously as Veronica began the presentation. "Gentlemen," she began, typing in English, "today we offer something unique. A virus capable of corrupting the world's most advanced security systems, including the defenses implemented by Thomson Holdings." Responses began to appear quickly. Messages of interest, requests for demonstrations, initial bids. Veronica smiled. "The starting bid is $5 million. In less than 10 minutes, the price had climbed to $20 million. While the auction was happening in the digital underworld, Isabella was in the Thomson Holdings lab, working with Julia on a routine update for the monitoring system. That's when the alert started. "Julia, look at this," Isabella said, pointing to a series of notifications appearing on the screen. "There's strange movement at several points in the network." Julia moved closer, analyzing the data. "Looks like reconnaissance activity. Someone is mapping vulnerabilities." Isabella typed quickly, tracing the origin of the attempts. "This is different from the other attacks. It's more coordinated, more systematic." Michael entered the lab at that moment and immediately sensed the tension. "What's going on?" "I think the attack is starting," Isabella replied in a calm voice, but her fingers trembled slightly on the keyboard. Michael picked up the phone. "Richard, we need you in the lab. Now." Over the next few minutes, the room filled with people. Richard rushed in, followed by Patricia and other members of the security team. They all gathered around the screens, watching the data Isabella had compiled. They're testing the defenses of institutions around the world, the girl explained, showing a global map with blinking red dots. Banks in Europe, hospitals in the United States, power, grids in Asia, it's simultaneous. This is what you predicted, Richard asked. Isabella nodded gravely. It's exactly the pattern I saw in the historical data, only now it's happening for real. How long until the main attack? Michael questioned. The girl analyzed the speed of the reconnaissance attempts, the frequency of the tests, the behavioral patterns. Based on the progression, I'd say less than 24 hours. The room fell into absolute silence. Richard took a deep breath. We have 24 hours to alert the entire world and ensure all systems are protected. Patricia shook her head. That's impossible, even if we started now, we couldn't contact every institution in time. Then we do what we can, Richard said. Julia, prepare a list of critical institutions, hospitals, power plants, central banks. Michael, activate all our contacts. Patricia, coordinate with government agencies. And what about the virus? Michael asked, looking at Isabella. If things get bad, do we use it? Richard looked at the girl, seeing the fear in her eyes. Isabella, the decision is yours. It's your code, your creation. The girl was silent for a long moment. Everyone waited, respecting the weight she carried. We only use it if there's no other option, she said finally, and only if I'm sure I can control it. Deal, Richard agreed. The next few hours were chaotic. Phone calls were made, emails were sent, contacts were activated. The protection network that Isabella had helped build over the past weeks was being put to the test sooner than expected. Some responded immediately, implementing extra security protocols. Others were skeptical, thinking it was an overreaction, and some simply didn't respond in time. While the Thompson Holdings team worked frantically, Veronica Lynch was closing the auction. The final bid had reached $42 million, offered by an anonymous consortium from Asia. Sold, she typed with satisfaction. Prepare the transfer, and you will receive the code. Dmitri watched her with a mixture of admiration and disgust. You're really going to do this? Sell a virus that could cause global chaos? I already have, Veronica replied, and in a few hours I'll be very, very rich. And if they trace it back to you? Veronica laughed. Impossible. I've taken every precaution. Besides, when the chaos starts, no one will care who sold the virus. They'll be too busy trying to survive. She wasn't entirely wrong. As the night wore on, the signs of the imminent attack became increasingly clear. Isabella's monitoring system detected growing waves of malicious activity, like ever higher tides before a tsunami. Isabella hadn't slept. She had been in the lab for 18 hours straight, sustained by cups of juice and pure adrenaline. Her parents had come to visit her, worried, but she insisted she needed to stay. My daughter, you need to rest, Celia said, holding Isabella's face in her hands. I can't, Mom. Too many people are depending on this. George put a hand on his wife's shoulder. She gets her stubbornness from you, honey. There's no use insisting. Celia had tears in her eyes. Promise me you'll take care of yourself. I promise, Isabella lied, turning her attention back to the screens. Julia, who also hadn't left the lab, approached Celia. I'll look after her, Mrs. Sanchez, I promise. Isabella's mother nodded reluctantly and left with her husband, leaving her daughter to do what she felt she had to do. It was 3 in the morning when everything changed. The alerts exploded on the screens simultaneously, hundreds of them, then thousands. The attack had begun. Isabella, what's happening? Michael shouted, waking from a nap. In a chair. It's now, the girl replied, her fingers flying across the keyboard. The main attack has started. Richard, who was in his office trying to coordinate international responses, ran to the lab. Julia was on the phone with contacts in London. Patricia was coordinating with the FBI. And in the midst of it all, Isabella worked with a calmness that contrasted with the surrounding chaos. She monitored the breach attempts in real time, directing defenses, closing loopholes, anticipating moves. It was like watching a chess master play hundreds of games simultaneously. But even with all her talent, she was just one person, and the attack was global, massive, coordinated. Hospital in Boston under attack, Julia announced, reading reports. Life support systems compromised. Germany's central bank reports a breach, Michael said. They're trying to drain reserves. Tokyo's power grid is having problems, Patricia added. The reports kept coming, each one more alarming than the last. Isabella did what she could, but she felt like someone trying to hold back a cracking dam with her bare hands. For every attack she blocked, 2 new ones emerged. That's when she realized something terrible. "The virus," she whispered. "What?" Richard asked, moving closer. Isabella showed a just-completed analysis on the screen. "They're using a version of my virus in the attack. Someone took the code and is using it against the institutions that installed my protection system." "How is that possible?" Michael questioned, incredulous. "The virus was secure here." Isabella shook her head, feeling nauseous. "The listening device. They must have recorded when we ran the tests." Richard's face turned ashen. "So our own defenses are being used against us?" "Worse than that," Isabella said, continuing her analysis. "They modified the virus, made it more aggressive. It's not just corrupting malicious versions of the system. It's attacking everything." The implication hung in the air like a death sentence. Julia was the first to verbalize it. "Isabella, you need to release your original virus. It's the only way to fight this." The girl froze. "But I'm not sure I can control it. If it spreads too far, it could cause immeasurable damage." "And if we do nothing," Michael argued, "the damage is already immeasurable." Richard knelt in front of Isabella, looking directly into her eyes. "Isabella, listen. I know you're scared. I am too. But you are the most brilliant person I have ever met. If anyone can make this work, it's you. And what if I fail?" "Then we fail together," Richard replied. "But if we don't try, we will certainly fail." Isabella looked at the screens, seeing hospitals going into emergency mode, banks being drained, power grids failing. She thought of all the people who were suffering at that moment because of something she had created, even if indirectly. "Okay," she said, her voice small but determined. "I'll do it." Julia rushed to her side. "Not alone. We'll do it together." Michael and the rest of the team took their positions at their stations. "We're with you, Isa." Isabella took a deep breath and began to type. Her small but precise fingers danced across the keyboard as she initiated the protocol to release the virus she had created. She added extra layers of security, additional control parameters, and automatic shutdown mechanisms. She did everything she could to ensure the virus did only what it was supposed to do. "Ready," she announced. "On my signal, I release the virus. It will propagate through the internet in seconds. Once it's out, there's no turning back." Everyone looked at her, waiting. Isabella glanced at Richard one last time. He gave her an encouraging nod. The girl closed her eyes for a second, gathering her courage. Then she opened them and pressed enter. The virus was released. For the first few seconds, nothing happened. The screens continued to show the same alerts, the same ongoing attacks. Then, slowly, things began to change. Isabella's virus found the corrupted versions of the code and began to neutralize them. Like antibodies attacking an infection, it identified and deactivated every instance of the malicious code. "It's working," Julia exclaimed, pointing at the graphs. "The attacks are decreasing." Isabella monitored everything closely, adjusting parameters in real time, making sure the virus wasn't going beyond its programmed limits. But then, something unexpected happened. The virus began to spread faster than she had anticipated. Much faster. "Isabella, what's happening?" Michael asked, seeing the numbers escalate exponentially. "It's replicating," she answered, panic rising in her voice. "Faster than it should. Something's wrong." She tried to implement the containment protocols, but the virus was already beyond her control. It had spread to so many systems that it was impossible to track all the instances. And then the worst happened. The virus, in its zeal to eliminate all corrupted versions of the code, began to attack systems it shouldn't. Hospitals with legitimate versions of the protection system started reporting failures. Banks with proper defenses saw their systems compromised. "Stop, stop, stop," Isabella muttered. frantically trying to find a way to shut down what she had created, but it was like trying to stop a wildfire with her bare hands. Reports began to pour in from all over the world, critical systems failing, emergency generators not working, communication networks going down. Isabella felt the world crumbling around her. She had tried to save everyone, and instead she had caused the very chaos she was trying to prevent. Tears began to stream down her face. "I've ruined everything! I've ruined everything!" Julia hugged her. "No, Isa, you tried to do the right thing. But that doesn't matter," the girl sobbed. "People are suffering because of me." Richard was on the phone receiving increasingly dire reports. When he finally hung up, his face was grey. "Isabella, we need to find a way to stop this. Now." The girl wiped her tears, forcing herself to focus. She couldn't afford to break down now. She had to find a solution. She looked at the code, analyzing it line by line, searching for a vulnerability, some way to stop the virus she had created. And then she saw it. "Wait," she said. "There's a way." "How?" Michael and Julia asked in unison. "The virus is looking for corrupted versions of the code, right? So if I create a fake version, a honeypot, I can lure all instances of the virus to a single point." "And then?" Richard questioned. "Then I shut it all down at once," Isabella replied. "It's like gathering all the fire in one place and then smothering it." "Will it work?" Michael asked. Isabella hesitated. "I don't know, but it's the only chance we have." "Then do it," Richard said. Isabella began to work on the honeypot. She created a fake version of the system, so convincing that the virus would believe it was real. Then she programmed a shutdown protocol that would be activated as soon as the virus concentrated on the trap. It took 20 minutes to create, 20 minutes during which more systems failed, more people suffered. When it was finally ready, Isabella looked at the team around her. "This might not work, and if it doesn't, I don't have another idea." "We trust you," Julia said. Isabella activated the honeypot. For a few agonizing seconds, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the instances of the virus began to converge on the trap, drawn in by the perfect bait Isabella had created. "It's working," Michael whispered. Isabella watched the numbers, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her temples. Every instance of the virus that joined the honeypot was a victory, but she needed all of them. A single loose instance could restart the entire cycle. 90%, Julia announced, monitoring the data. 95, 98, 99, and then finally 100%. All instances of the virus were in the trap. Isabella didn't hesitate. She activated the shutdown protocol. The effect was immediate. The virus was completely deactivated, all its instances neutralized simultaneously. The alerts on the screens began to diminish. Systems around the world started to recover. Hospitals returned to normal. Banks restored their operations. The nightmare was over. But the price had been high. In the following hours, reports began to come in about the temporary consequences of the out-of-control virus. Although most systems had been restored, some people had been affected. Patients in hospitals whose equipment had temporarily failed. People trapped in elevators during power outages, traffic accidents caused by malfunctioning traffic lights. Richard compiled the numbers, and when he finally had the total, he called Isabella for a private conversation in his office. The girl entered slowly as if she were walking to her own trial. "Sit," Richard said gently. Isabella sat in the large leather chair, her feet dangling without touching the floor. Richard took a deep breath. "Isabella, I need to tell you something, and it's not going to be easy to hear." "I know," she said in a small voice. "People got hurt because of me." Richard nodded. "Yes. The temporary failures caused serious situations. We have reports of 17 people who did not survive the complications." The girl became completely still, as if she had turned to stone. "But," Richard continued quickly, "you also need to know that your system saved thousands of lives. Without it, the original attack would have caused incomparably greater destruction. And without your courage to act, even when you were afraid, the consequences would have been catastrophic." Isabella shook her head. It doesn't matter how many people I saved. There are 17 families suffering because of me. Tears began to stream down her face, silent but constant. Richard came out from behind his desk and knelt in front of her, holding her small hands. Isabella, listen. You are 8 years old. 8. You shouldn't be dealing with this. You shouldn't be carrying this weight. And if there is any blame here, it's mine, for allowing a child to take on adult responsibilities. But I wanted to do it, Isabella sobbed. No one forced me. I know, and that shows who you are, but now you need to understand something, Isabella. What happened was not your fault. You did the best you could with the impossible choices you had. The blame lies with those who stole your code, who launched the attack, who put greed above human lives. But the people who suffered won't see it that way, Isabella said. They'll hate me. Maybe some will, Richard admitted, and you'll have to learn to live with that. But many others will thank you. They'll understand that you are a hero, not a villain. Isabella didn't feel like a hero. She felt like a girl who had played with forces she didn't fully understand and had caused pain to innocent people. I want to apologize, she said finally, to the families in person. Richard hesitated. Isabella, I don't know if that's a good idea. It could be very painful for you. I have to, she insisted. They deserve to hear that I'm sorry, that I never wanted to hurt anyone. Richard looked at this extraordinary girl, carrying a burden that would break many adults, and felt his heart ache. Okay, I'll arrange it. In the following days, Isabella visited 7 families. Some received her with anger, others with understanding, others with an indifference, numbed by grief. Each visit was an emotional torture. Isabella listened to stories of the people who were gone, saw photos, met loved ones devastated by loss. And in each home, she repeated the same words, tears streaming down her face. I'm so sorry. I never wanted this to happen. I just wanted to help. Some families forgave her, others did not, and Isabella accepted both reactions as a just penance. It was during one of these visits that something changed. The 7th family was that of a woman named Beatrice who had been impacted during the failure of a hospital equipment. Isabella arrived at her house prepared for more pain, more guilt, more tears. But when Beatrice opened the door and saw Isabella, she did something unexpected. She hugged her. You're so young, Beatrice said, tears in her eyes. So young and carrying so much. Isabella didn't know how to respond. Beatrice led her inside, where an entire wall was covered with newspaper clippings and printouts of articles, all about Isabella, about her system, about the lives she had saved. My sister is a doctor at a hospital in Charleston, Beatrice explained. On the day of the attack, her system was breached. But your program protected the most critical equipment. Dozens of patients survived because of it. She pointed to a photo on the wall, a smiling woman in a white lab coat. She told me about you, about the little girl who was saving the world. And when things went wrong, when there were the temporary failures, she was one of the first to defend you. Isabella looked at the photo, not fully understanding. What I'm trying to say, Beatrice continued, is that you can't just carry the guilt. You have to carry the good you did too. My sister is alive because of you. Hundreds of her patients are too. Don't let the pain of a few mistakes erase the miracle of all your victories. For the first time since the chaos had begun, Isabella allowed herself to feel something other than guilt. She felt a small spark of hope, of redemption, of the possibility of healing. When she left Beatrice's house, she was different. She still carried pain, still felt the weight of the losses, but now she also carried something more. She carried the understanding that being human meant making mistakes, and that true character was not measured by the absence of errors, but by the courage to carry on despite them. Richard was waiting for her in the car. He saw something different in her face. How was it? Difficult, Isabella replied, but necessary. On the way back, she looked out the window, watching New York pass in a blur of lights and shadows. Her city, her home, her world, a world she had nearly broken, but had also helped to save. And for the first time in days, Isabella Sanchez allowed herself to think about a future a future where she could use her painful lessons to do better, be better, create better. But that future would have to wait, because the storm may have passed, but its consequences were still being felt. And Isabella, even though she was just a girl, knew her journey was far from over. The weeks that followed the chaos were a time of rebuilding, both for the systems that had failed and for the soul of Isabella Sanchez. The girl who once worked 16 hours a day could now barely look at a computer without feeling nauseous. Celia and George watched their daughter with growing concern. Isabella would spend hours lying in bed, hugging popcorn, staring at the ceiling without saying a word. When they tried to talk to her, she would respond in monosyllables. The light that had always shone in her eyes had gone out. It was Marina, Richard's wife, who suggested therapy. "She's a child who has lived through traumas that adults couldn't process," she said during a dinner with the Sanchez couple at the safe house. "She needs professional help." George agreed immediately, but Celia had reservations. "I don't want people to think my daughter is crazy." "No one will think that," Marina assured her gently. "Therapy isn't for crazy people. It's for people who are smart enough to recognize when they need help." And so Isabella began seeing Dr. Helen Parker, a renowned child psychologist specializing in gifted children. Twice a week, Isabella went to the elegant office on the Upper East Side and slowly began to peel back the layers of pain she had accumulated. Dr. Parker didn't try to convince her that she wasn't guilty. Instead, she helped Isabella understand the difference between responsibility and guilt, between doing one's best and being perfect, between bearing the consequences and being defined by them. "You know, Isabella," the psychologist said during one session, "your brain is extraordinary, but your heart is still that of an 8-year-old girl, and it's okay to be a child, even when you're capable of things adults are not." "But people depend on me," Isabella argued, "and you can help them without destroying yourself in the process. You can be brilliant and still have limits. You can save the world and still need a hug from your mom." These words echoed in Isabella's mind over the following days. While Isabella worked on her emotional recovery, the world worked to find those responsible for the attack. The FBI, in conjunction with Interpol, had set up a task force to trace the origin of the stolen code and the dark web auction. Michael and Patricia worked directly with the investigators, providing technical information and helping to track digital patterns. It was Patricia who first identified a promising lead. "Look at this," she said, during a meeting with the federal agents. "The listening device we found had a unique digital signature. We managed to trace its purchase to a distributor in New York, federal agent Marcus Oliver, a serious 40-year-old with 20 years of experience in cybercrime, leaned in to see the data. And does the distributor have records?" "They do," Patricia confirmed. "The purchase was made by a shell company, but we got the bank records. They lead to an account in the name of Veronica Lynch." The name meant nothing to Marcus, but when they ran it through their systems, they found a troubling history. Veronica had been investigated multiple times for digital crimes, but had never been convicted. She was smart, careful, always keeping enough distance to have plausible deniability. But this time, she had made a mistake. Greed had made her careless. "We'll need a warrant for surveillance," Marcus said, "and we'll need solid evidence before we move. This woman is slippery." "You'll have our full cooperation," assured Richard, who was present at the meeting. The surveillance began immediately. Undercover federal agents monitored Veronica's apartment 24 hours a day. They intercepted her digital communications, tracked her movements, and documented her every contact. And slowly, patiently, they began to build a case. Veronica, for her part, believed she was safe. The $42 million from the auction had been transferred to untraceable offshore accounts, or so she thought. Dmitry had returned to Russia, cutting ties with her, too worried about the potential consequences. She was alone in her apartment, sipping expensive champagne and planning her next move, when she noticed something strange. Her computer was running slower than usual. Programs were opening with a delay. Connections were taking milliseconds longer than they should. To most people, these would be insignificant details. But Veronica was paranoid and experienced enough to recognize the signs. Someone was monitoring her systems. Her heart raced. Quickly, she began to implement emergency protocols. She wiped hard drives, transferred funds to new accounts, and destroyed physical evidence. But it was too late. The FBI already had everything they needed. The next morning at 6 a.m., Marcus led a team of 15 agents in executing the search and seizure warrant. They broke down the door to Veronica's apartment, entered with guns drawn, and found her desperately trying to destroy the last of her computers. "Veronica Lynch, you're under arrest," Marcus announced, handcuffs already in his hands. The woman looked at him with hatred. "You have nothing on me. My lawyers will have me out in hours." Marcus smiled coldly. "Your lawyers are going to need a miracle. We have evidence of conspiracy, cybercrimes, and facilitating digital terrorism. You're going to spend a very long time in prison, Ms. Lynch." When news of the arrest reached Thompson Holdings, there was a subdued celebration. Justice was being served, but no one forgot that Veronica's arrest didn't bring back the lives that were lost. Richard decided not to tell Isabella immediately. The girl was still fragile, focusing on her recovery. But Isabella found out anyway, seeing the news on television when her parents thought she was in her room. She stared at the photo of Veronica being led away, in handcuffs, surrounded by federal agents and camera flashes. The woman who had stolen her code, who had sold it to the highest bidder, who had helped cause so much suffering. Isabella had expected to feel anger, satisfaction at the arrest, but all she felt was emptiness. Veronica's arrest didn't undo the damage, didn't erase the scars. "Did you see the news?" Celia asked, appearing at the living room door. Isabella nodded. "Is that the woman who stole my code?" "It is," her mother confirmed, sitting next to her on the couch. "How do you feel about it?" "I don't know," Isabella admitted. "I should be happy, but I'm not. I just feel tired." Celia hugged her daughter. "Dr. Parker says you're making progress, that you're learning to process everything that happened." "I'm trying," Isabella said, "but sometimes it feels impossible." "Nothing is impossible for you, my little genius." Isabella nestled into her mother's embrace, allowing herself for a moment to be just a child. Not a prodigy, not a savior, not a genius. Just Isabella, a girl who needed her mother's hug. With Veronica arrested and the investigations deepening, Richard began to think about the future. He knew Isabella needed time to heal, but he also knew her talent was too extraordinary to be wasted. During a meeting with Michael and Julia, he proposed an idea. What if we created a foundation, not to exploit Isabella's talent, but to nurture talents like hers in other children? Julia loved the idea immediately. We could offer scholarships, equipment, mentorship, create an environment where gifted children can develop their gifts without the pressure Isabella faced. And ensure, Michael added, that they have emotional support. Psychologists, therapists, people who understand their unique needs. Richard nodded. "Exactly. We'll call it the Isabella Sanchez Foundation. If she agrees, of course." When they presented the idea to Isabella, she was silent for a long time. Then she asked, her voice small but hopeful, "Do you think I can make a difference in a way that doesn't hurt anyone?" "I'm sure of it," Richard replied. "You've already made a difference. You saved thousands of lives. Now you can inspire and help other children do the same." Isabella thought of children like her, brilliant but perhaps lonely, with minds that worked differently, with gifts that weren't always understood. She thought about what it would have been like, to have a support network, people who understood, resources that could help her. "I accept," she said finally, "but on one condition, which is that we don't force any child to do anything, that each one can choose how to use their gifts, and that we always put their emotional well-being first." Richard extended his hand. "Deal." Isabella shook his hand, sealing the agreement. The Isabella Sanchez Foundation was officially launched 3 months later in a quiet but moving ceremony. The first group of scholarship recipients included 10 children from different parts of the United States, each with exceptional talents in various fields. Isabella met each of them personally. There was Peter, a 9-year-old boy from rural Texas who was a math prodigy. There was Larissa, a 7-year-old girl from New Orleans with extraordinary musical abilities. There was Miguel, a 10-year-old from a tough neighborhood in Los Angeles, who painted pictures that seemed impossible for someone his age. Each child had a story, a gift, a dream, and now, thanks to Isabella, they would have a chance. During the launch event, Isabella was asked to say a few words. She walked up to the small stage, nervous but determined. "My name is Isabella Sanchez," she began, her voice clear. "I'm 8 years old, I'll be 9 in June, and I know what it's like to be different." The scholarship children looked at her with rapt attention. "Being gifted isn't easy," Isabella continued. "Sometimes you feel alone, sometimes people don't understand, and sometimes you make big mistakes. Mistakes that hurt." She paused, remembering the visits to the families, the pain, the guilt. "But it can also be amazing. You can create things that help people. You can solve problems that seem impossible. You can make a difference in the world." Peter raised his hand timidly. "But what if we make a mistake? What if we hurt someone without meaning to?" Isabella looked at him with understanding. "Then you learn, you apologize, you try to do better next time, and you remember that being brilliant doesn't mean being perfect." The words came from her heart, laden with the painful lessons she had learned. "This foundation," Isabella continued, "is to make sure you don't have to face everything alone, like I did. You'll have mentors, therapists, friends who understand. You'll have resources and opportunities, but most importantly, you'll have permission to be kids." When she finished, there wasn't thunderous applause, but there was something better. There was connection, understanding, a sense of community among children who had always felt isolated in their brilliance. After the event, Larissa, the 7-year-old who loved music, approached Isabella. "Can I ask you a question?" "Sure. Do you still like computers, after everything that happened?" Isabella thought carefully before answering. "You know, for a while I hated them. I couldn't even look at a keyboard without remembering everything that went wrong. But Dr. Parker helped me understand that the problem wasn't the computers. It was how I was using them and the pressure I put on myself. And now?" "Now," Isabella admitted with a small smile, "I'm learning to like them again, but in a different, healthier way." Larissa nodded, processing. "I think I get it." That conversation marked a turning point for Isabella. For the first time since the chaos, she returned to the lab at Thompson Holdings. Julia greeted her with a tight hug. "I missed you," Julia said. "I missed you too," Isabella replied. "Ready to get back to work?" Isabella looked at the computers, the screens, the space that had been her second home. "I think so, but slowly this time." "Slowly is perfect," Julia agreed. And slowly was exactly how they proceeded. Isabella no longer worked 16-hour days. She worked 2, 3 at most, and always with breaks, always with Julia or another adult present, always with an awareness of her own limits. She began to develop a new version of her protection system. This one had multiple layers of security, human control mechanisms at every critical stage, and most importantly, it could not be modified or corrupted without the express authorization of multiple people. "It's like a nuclear launch system," she explained to Michael during a presentation. "You need multiple keys, multiple people agreeing, to activate or modify anything critical." "Brilliant," Michael praised, "and impossible for one person to compromise alone." "Exactly," Isabella confirmed. "I learned that being brilliant doesn't mean carrying everything on your own. It means knowing when to ask for help." These were lessons she had learned the hard way, but now they were a part of who she was. As Isabella healed and grew, the world began to recognize her contributions. Articles were written, documentaries were produced, awards were proposed. And on a November morning, 6 months after the chaos, Richard entered the lab with a surprised expression. "Isabella, there are people from Oslo on the line, from the Nobel Committee." The girl, who was adjusting code with Julia, turned around. "The Nobel Committee? Why?" Richard smiled. "They want to nominate you for the Nobel Peace Prize." Isabella blinked, not fully processing. "Me? But I'm 8 years old." "Almost 9, Julia corrected with a smile. "They say," Richard continued, that your work saved thousands of lives and demonstrated that collaboration and knowledge sharing can protect humanity. They want to recognize that." Isabella was silent, processing. Part of her wanted to refuse, still carrying the guilt for the lives her virus had taken. But another part, the part that was learning to forgive herself, recognized that maybe she could use this platform to do more good. "What do you think?" she asked Richard. "I think," he said carefully, "it's your decision, but I think you deserve this recognition, and I think you could inspire millions of other children around the world." Isabella looked at Julia, who nodded encouragingly. She looked at the screens around her, at the lab that had become her sanctuary. She thought of all the children in the foundation, of all the lives she could still touch. "Okay," she said finally, "I accept." The news of the nomination spread quickly. 8-year-old Isabella Sanchez became the youngest person ever nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. The world media exploded with the story, wanting interviews, photos, documentaries. Richard protected Isabella as much as he could, allowing only carefully selected appearances, always with her and her parents' approval. Celia and George, who had gone from cleaning staff to the parents of a global celebrity, tried to maintain some sense of normalcy. Isabella still went to school, still played. With Popcorn, still had to do her math homework, which ironically remained her most difficult subject. But now, when she left the house, there were discreet security guards. When she went to school, there were photographers outside. Her life had irrevocably changed. It was during this turbulent period that Isabella had an important conversation with Dr. Parker. "I'm scared," the girl admitted during a session. "Scared of disappointing people. Scared of making another big mistake. Scared I'm not strong enough for all of this." Dr. Parker leaned forward. "Isabella, can I tell you a secret?" "You can. Everyone is scared. Even adults, even the most successful people in the world. What defines us is not the absence of fear, but what we do despite it." "But what if I fail?" "Then you'll get up and try again, just like you did after the chaos. You fell, but you didn't stay down. That's courage. That's strength." Isabella absorbed the words, letting them penetrate the layers of insecurity she still carried. "And remember," the psychologist continued, "you don't have to be perfect to be extraordinary. You are already extraordinary exactly as you are, flaws and all." For the first time in months, Isabella felt something akin to peace. It wasn't complete. There were still healing wounds, still nights when she woke up with nightmares of failing systems and suffering people, but she was on the path to healing. And maybe, she thought, that was the most important lesson of all, that healing wasn't a destination, but a journey, that you could carry scars and still be strong, that you could make mistakes and still be worthy of forgiveness. As Isabella walked this journey of self-discovery and healing, the world kept spinning. The Isabella Sanchez Foundation grew, helping dozens, then hundreds of gifted children. The new protection system she had developed was being implemented in institutions around the world, safer, more robust, more human. And in a federal prison, Veronica Lynch awaited trial. Her lawyers had tried every legal trick possible, but the evidence was overwhelming. She was facing decades in prison. When asked during an interrogation why she had done it all, her answer was simple and chilling. "Because I could, because the money was there for the taking, because at the end of the day everyone only looks out for themselves." The investigator shook his head. "Not everyone, Ms. Lynch. There's an 8-year-old girl who proved the exact opposite." Veronica had no answer for that. As the year came to an end, Isabella prepared for the Nobel ceremony in Oslo. It would be in December, and she would be accompanied by her parents, by Richard and Marina, by Julia and Michael, and by representatives of the children from the foundation. The night before the trip, Isabella was in her room, packing her suitcase with her mother's help. Popcorn was lying on the bed, watching with his big, loyal eyes. "Mom?" Isabella asked suddenly. "Do you think I deserve this? The prize?" Celia stopped folding clothes and looked at her daughter. "My little one, you saved thousands of lives. You created systems that protect millions of people. You inspired children around the world. Of course you deserve it." "But the people who suffered because of me," Isabella began. Celia sat beside her, holding her hands. My daughter, listen. You've carried enough guilt. You've learned from your mistakes. You've apologized. You've tried to do better. That's enough. It's time to accept that you did the best you could with the impossible choices you had. Tears began to stream down Isabella's face. Dr. Parker says the same thing. Because it's true, Celia said, wiping her daughter's tears, and it's time for you to believe it. That night, Isabella slept better than she had in months. She dreamed not of failing systems or corrupted codes, but of possibilities. She dreamed of all the children she could help, all the problems she could solve, all the good she could still do. And when she woke up the next morning, ready for the trip to Oslo, she felt something she hadn't felt since before the chaos. She felt hope, not naive, not blind, but tempered by experience, strengthened by pain, matured by suffering. Isabella Sanchez was growing up, not just in years, but in wisdom, in empathy, in understanding what it meant to be human in a complex and often unfair world. And as she prepared to step onto the stage in Oslo and receive one of the most prestigious awards in the world, she knew one thing for sure. Her journey was far from over, but now, at least, she wasn't walking it alone. The plane landed in Oslo under a grey sky typical of a Norwegian December. Isabella looked out the window at the snow-covered landscape, so different from the warmth of New York she had left behind. Beside her, Celia held her hand, conveying a silent calm and support. George was across the aisle talking with Richard about the ceremony preparations. Marina, Julia and Michael occupied the nearby seats, all part of the small American delegation accompanying Isabella on this historic occasion. When they deplaned, they were met by representatives from the Nobel Committee and a small crowd of journalists. Flashes fired from all directions, questions shouted in English, Norwegian and Spanish. Isabella, how does it feel to be the youngest Nobel Peace Prize nominee? What do you want to say to the children of the world? Are you nervous? Richard and Michael formed a protective shield around Isabella and her family, guiding them gently through the crowd to the waiting car. Isabella kept her head down, holding tight to her mother's hand. Popcorn, unfortunately, had stayed in New York with a family friend, and she missed her furry companion. The hotel was luxurious, with stunning views of the fjord and Oslo's historic center. Isabella had her own room connected to her parents', decorated with minimalist Scandinavian elegance. But despite all the luxury, she felt butterflies in her stomach. The ceremony was in 2 days, and time seemed to pass in both slow motion and high speed at once. On the first day, Isabella met with other laureates and nominees. There was an African diplomat who had negotiated peace between warring tribes, a human rights activist who had saved hundreds of refugees, a scientist who developed clean water technology for underserved regions. Isabella felt small among these giants. These were people who had dedicated decades of their lives to doing good, and there she was, an 8-year-old girl who had made grave mistakes. It was the diplomat, a 70-year-old gentleman named Kofi, who noticed her insecurity. He sat beside her during lunch and said with a gentle accent, "Little one, may I tell you something I've learned in my long life?" Isabella nodded. True heroism is not found in the absence of failure. It is in continuing to try to do good despite it. You fell, and you rose again. That makes you stronger than those who have never fallen. "But the people who suffered," Isabella began. Kofi shook his head. "Child, in my work, I have seen war. I have seen famine. I have seen unimaginable suffering, and I have learned that we cannot carry all the world's pain. We can only do our part to lessen it. And you have done more than your part." The diplomat's words echoed in Isabella's mind throughout the day. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps she was punishing herself too much. The night before the ceremony, Isabella couldn't sleep. At 2 in the morning, she quietly left her room and went to the window, looking at the illuminated city below. Snow fell softly, blanketing everything in a pure white mantle. "Can't sleep?" a voice asked from behind her. Isabella turned to see Julia, also awake, wrapped in a robe. "I'm nervous," Isabella admitted. Julia sat beside her on the wide window ledge. It's natural. Tomorrow is a big day. What if I forget my speech? What if I trip on stage? What if I disappoint everyone? Julia smiled gently. Isa, you've done much harder things than give a speech. You saved billions of dollars, protected global systems, created an entire foundation. Compared to that, public speaking is easy. But so many people are expecting so much from me. Then you show them who you really are, not a human supercomputer, not a perfect hero, just Isabella. And Isabella is more than enough. The girl hugged Julia, feeling the warmth and comfort of the analyst who had become like an older sister to her. Thanks, Ju, for everything. You're welcome, kiddo. Now let's try to get some sleep. You need to be rested for tomorrow. But sleep didn't come easily. Isabella spent the night mentally rehearsing her speech, changing words, adjusting phrases, trying to capture exactly what she wanted to say. The morning of the ceremony dawned clear and cold. Isabella woke to Celia already in the room, bringing breakfast and a beautiful dress Marina had chosen for her. It was navy blue, simple yet elegant, appropriate for a child, but respectful of the occasion. "How are you feeling?" Celia asked, helping her daughter get dressed. Scared, but also ready. Celia hugged her daughter, and Isabella realized her mother was crying. "Why are you crying, Mom?" "Because I'm so proud of you, my little one. So proud my heart feels like it's going to burst." George entered at that moment, impeccable in a suit Richard had insisted on buying. He stopped upon seeing his wife and daughter embracing, and his own eyes filled with tears. "My two beautiful women," he said, his voice thick with emotion. The family stayed like that for a moment, embraced, united by a love that had sustained them through hardship, illness, and now unexpected success. The Oslo Concert Hall, where the ceremony would take place, was an impressive architectural feat. Isabella and her delegation arrived an hour early, allowing time for final preparations. Backstage, Isabella met the other laureates who would be receiving awards in different categories. They were all kind to her, the child among adults, treating her with respect and admiration. When the time finally came, Isabella was led to the wings of the main stage. She could hear the audience on the other side, hundreds of important people from all over the world, members of the Norwegian royal family, diplomats, scientists, world leaders. Her heart was beating so hard she thought everyone could hear it. Richard appeared beside her. "Isabella, I have something for you." He handed her a small envelope. Isabella opened it and found an old photograph. It was of her at 4 years old, smiling with her first toy computer, the one her parents had saved for months to buy. On the back was a message in Celia's handwriting. "To our little genius, never forget where you came from. Never lose your smile. We love you infinitely." Isabella felt tears well up. "Thank you," she whispered. "To remind you," Richard said, "that before you were the Isabella who saved the world, you were the Isabella who just loved computers, and both are equally valuable." The ceremony's host began to announce the laureates. One by one, they went on stage, received their awards and gave their speeches. And then it was Isabella's turn. "And now," the host announced in English, "it is my honor to present the youngest nominee in the history of the Nobel Peace Prize, a child whose brilliance and courage saved thousands of lives and inspired millions around the world. From New York City, USA, Isabella Sanchez." The applause was deafening. Isabella walked onto the stage, her legs trembling slightly. The auditorium was enormous, 1,000 people watching her. The lights were bright, almost blinding. But then she saw her parents in the front row, George with tears openly streaming down his face, Celia with her hands over her heart. Beside them, Richard and Marina, Julia, and Michael, all smiling with pride. And Isabella remembered why she was there. Not for the awards, not for the fame, but because she had tried to make a difference. And she had succeeded, despite all the mistakes along the way. The chairman of the Nobel Committee presented her with the diploma and the medal. Isabella held them carefully, feeling the weight not just of the medal, but of the responsibility and the recognition. Then she approached the microphone to give her speech. "Good afternoon," she began in English. My name is Isabella Sanchez. I am 8 years old, almost 9, and I am from New York City. Her voice was clear despite her nerves. When they told me I was nominated for this prize, my first reaction was to think there had been a mistake. I am just a child who likes computers, who still struggles with math in school, who plays with her dog and watches cartoons. Gentle laughter rippled through the audience. But then I realized that maybe that's exactly why I'm here. Because being extraordinary doesn't mean you're not human. Because being brilliant doesn't mean being perfect. She paused, gathering courage for the next part. Many of you know that my cybersecurity protection system had unintended consequences. When I tried to stop a global attack, I made mistakes. And those mistakes cost lives. 17 people suffered complications during the temporary failures my virus caused. The silence in the auditorium was absolute. For months I carried guilt for that. I thought I didn't deserve recognition, that I should be punished, not praised. But people wiser than me taught me something important. Isabella looked at Dr. Parker, who was in the audience, smiling encouragingly. They taught me that being human means making mistakes. And that's true. Character is not found in the absence of mistakes, but in what we do after them. We can let guilt paralyze us, or we can learn and try to do better. She took a deep breath. I chose to learn. I chose to do better. And that's why I created the Isabella Sanchez Foundation, to help other children with special gifts develop their talents without the pressure I faced, to ensure they have emotional support, resources, and most importantly, permission to be kids. Applause started, but Isabella gently raised her hand, indicating she wasn't finished. I want to dedicate this award to several people. To my parents, George and Celia, who always believed in me even when I was strange, even when I was different. To Beatrice and her sister, who taught me about forgiveness. To Dr. Parker, who helped me heal. To Richard Thompson, who gave me opportunities that changed my life. To Julia, Michael, and the entire team at Thompson Holdings, who worked by my side. She took one last pause, the most important words yet to come. But most of all, I want to dedicate this prize to the children around the world who feel invisible. To the children who are different, who think differently, who dream differently. I want you to know that your brilliance is not a curse, it is a gift, and the world needs exactly what makes you unique. Tears were streaming down Isabella's face now, but her voice remained steady. Don't give up. Don't let anyone dim your light. And when you make mistakes, because you will, don't let those mistakes define who you are. Get up, learn, and keep shining. The applause that followed was thunderous. People rose to their feet, a standing ovation that lasted for several minutes. Isabella saw her father, hugging her mother, both openly weeping. She saw Richard discreetly wiping away a tear. She saw Julia sobbing unashamedly. And all over the world, millions of people watching on television were touched by the words of this extraordinary girl. After the ceremony, there was an elegant reception. Isabella was greeted by kings and queens, by prime ministers and presidents, by laureates from previous years. Everyone wanted to meet the child prodigy, the youngest to receive such an honor. But the person whose opinion mattered most to Isabella was waiting quietly in a corner. It was Kofi, the African diplomat. He approached, bowed slightly and said, "Child, you have honored us all today. Your speech was one of the most powerful I have ever heard on this stage." "Thank you, sir," Isabella said shyly. "Don't thank me. You simply spoke your truth. And truth, especially when it comes from a pure heart, is always powerful." The following days in Oslo were filled with events, interviews, and celebrations. But Isabella missed home, her room, popcorn, her routine. On the last night before returning to the United States, the Sanchez family had a private dinner at the hotel. Just the three of them. No cameras, no audience, no pressure. "How are you feeling, my daughter?" George asked, pouring more juice for Isabella. "Tired," she admitted, "but also happy, and ready to go home." Celia smiled. "Home. It feels like so long since we've had a normal life." "I don't think we'll ever have a completely normal life again," Isabella said, but we can have a good life." George raised his glass. "To a good life, then, and to this incredible family." Celia and Isabella raised their glasses too, toasting to family, to love, to the journey they had traveled together. The flight back to the US was smooth. Isabella spent most of it sleeping, emotionally exhausted from the events of the past weeks. When she woke up, they were beginning their descent into New York. She looked out the window, watching her city approach. The gigantic, chaotic, beautiful and challenging metropolis that was her home. "It's good to be home," she said to no one in particular. When they landed, they were greeted by a crowd at the airport. Not just journalists, but ordinary people. Children holding signs with messages of support. Parents with their kids wanting them to see the child prodigy. In person. Richard had arranged extra security, but it was still overwhelming. Isabella tried to greet as many people as possible, especially the children, before being gently guided to the waiting car. In the following months, life gradually settled into a new normal. Isabella returned to school, where she was treated as a celebrity by some and with envy by others, but she handled both with the grace she had learned on her journey. She continued to work with the foundation, now with hundreds of scholarship children across the country. She continued to refine her cybersecurity systems, but always with teams, always with supervision, always with healthy boundaries. And she continued her sessions with Dr. Parker because she recognized that healing was an ongoing journey, not a destination. 1 year after the Nobel ceremony, on her 9th birthday, Isabella organized a special party. Not in the luxurious safe house, but in an underprivileged community in the Bronx, where the foundation had opened its first support center. There were hundreds of children, many of them participants in the foundation's programs. There was cake, candy, games, and there was something more important. There was joy. The pure, uncomplicated joy of children being children. Isabella, now 9, played tag with the other kids, her laughter echoing across the playground. For a moment, she wasn't the Nobel laureate, not the creator of revolutionary systems. She was just a girl celebrating her birthday. George and Celia watched from a distance, hand in hand. "She's going to be okay," Celia said. "She will," George agreed. "Our girl is strong, stronger than we ever imagined." Richard and Marina were also there, as were Julia and Michael, the entire extended family that had formed around Isabella. Julia approached Richard. "You know you changed her life forever when you let her into that conference room." "I know," Richard replied, "but I think she changed mine too. She reminded me why I started all this. Not for the money, not for the power, but to make a difference." "And you did," Michael said, joining the conversation. "Through her we made a difference for millions." As the party wound down and the sun began to set over New York, Isabella climbed onto a small makeshift stage to thank everyone for coming. "Thank you for coming to celebrate with me," she said, her voice amplified by a simple microphone. "This has been the hardest and most incredible year of my life. I've learned so much about myself, about the world, and about what really matters." The children listened intently. "And what matters," Isabella continued, "isn't awards or recognition. What matters are people, the people we love, the people we help, and the people who help us. And most importantly, what matters is never giving up on trying to do good, even when it's hard, even when we make mistakes." She looked at her parents, at Richard, at Julia, at all the people who had supported her. "So my birthday wish is simple. I wish for every child here to know that they are special, that each one has opportunities to develop their gifts, and that each one remembers that no matter where you come from, no matter how many obstacles you face, you can do amazing things." The applause was warm and sincere. That night, when Isabella finally returned home, exhausted but happy, she wrote in her diary something Dr. Parker had suggested as therapy. "Dear Diary," she wrote in her childish but neat handwriting. "Today I turned 9. Last year I thought my life was over. I thought the mistakes I made would define me forever. But I was wrong. The mistakes are a part of me, but they aren't all of me. I am also the people I helped, the systems I created, the children I inspired. I am the tears I cried and the smiles I gave. I am imperfect, and extraordinary at the same time. And that's okay. It's more than okay. It's perfect just the way it is. She closed the diary and looked around her room. The medals and awards were on a shelf, but next to them were more important things, photos of her family. Drawings from children at the foundation. The old photo of her at 4 with her first computer. 9-year-old Isabella Sanchez had an incredible journey ahead of her. There would be more challenges, more obstacles, probably more mistakes. But she was ready, because she had learned the most important lesson of all, that strength comes not from never falling, but from always getting back up. That wisdom comes not from never erring, but from learning from every mistake. And that true heroism lies not in being perfect, but in being brave enough to try even knowing you might fail. And with that understanding, with that hard-won knowledge, Isabella closed her eyes and slept, dreaming not of glory or recognition, but of possibilities, of all the lives she could still touch, all the problems she could still solve, all the difference she could still make. Because Isabella Sanchez, the girl who saved billions, who won the Nobel Prize, who created revolutionary systems, was in the end just a child with a gift and the courage to use it for good. And that, she discovered, was more than enough. The years passed. Isabella grew, but she never lost her essence. At 18, she was pursuing a PhD in computer science while running a foundation that had helped over 10,000 gifted children around the world. But even with all her success, she never forgot the lessons of that difficult year. She never forgot the 17 lives that were lost. She never forgot the weight of responsibility, the price of mistakes, the importance of forgiveness. And always, always, she remembered where she came from. From a small apartment in a New York borough. From simple parents who worked hard and loved unconditionally. From a dog named Popcorn, and from dreams that seemed impossible, but that with hard work, courage, and a little bit of luck became reality. Isabella Sanchez, who started as an invisible girl in a giant city, became a beacon of hope for millions. Not because she was perfect, but because she was human. Not because she never failed, but because she had the courage to keep trying after every failure. And that, perhaps, is the greatest lesson of all. That dreams have no limits, that origin does not determine destiny, and that a single person, no matter how young, no matter how unlikely, can change the world. Isabella Sanchez changed the world, and the world in turn changed her, for the better, forever.